Hello, anti-novelists and friends. As the sun sets here on the ranch on another 10-degree day, let's dive back into a little library ambiance and take a look at Act 3. So we've covered Acts 1 and 2 and talked about how to basically put together the first half of your novel. So as we move into Act 3 of 4, we've already covered 1 and 2, which bring you up to the midpoint. Now we're going to talk about Act 3 and 4, which finish the second half of the book. So at the beginning of Act 3, we've just come off of the midpoint, all right? So the midpoint is when your main character, experiences a mirror moment. A mirror moment is when that character looks at their life, their situation, and says, if I don't change, I'm going to die. And we already know there's multiple ways to kill off your character. So this is where they become aware of their wound. They become aware of the thing that has governed their life that has led to them being stuck in the way that they are stuck now. So this is where they know it's time to struggle and go through the growth to fix whatever the problem is. I've added a note. The dark force brewing indicates a clue that your character must grow trust and trust help in order to start forging a connection that's going to get them catapulted out of Act 3 into Act 4. So Act 3 is where you really start to see character growth. That's critical. So what's happening? Well, they're reacting to the midpoint. They're recalibrating from whatever happened at the end of Act 2. This is where the tests begin to escalate. This is where they're taking strong actions. Often, historically, you would say this is where there's rising action. Things are really starting to ramp up. How do you do that? There's a couple of quick tips, including shortening your sentences and shortening your paragraphs. The faster things are happening, the faster dialogue and action is stacking up, the faster the story moves. So when you get past the middle of Act 3 into Act 4, you really want to speed things up and push that reader through the story. That's how you gather momentum. I've got a note about your inner life. They're gathering their strength. They're saying to themselves, I must face and deal with this problem. There's no more hiding. There's no more denial. It's time to deal with whatever the main conflict of the story is and start to hint at answering whatever the dramatic question is. This is where your character is going to formulate a new plan. Okay, so based on whatever revelations occurred after the midpoint, they're going to formulate a new plan and decide, okay, here's how I'm going to attack this now. This becomes what I've labeled the meat of Act 3. This is also another good place to develop out those subplots. Start wrapping up some of those minor story threads and weaving those together so that the whole story starts to gel by the time you get to Act 3. So again, there's series of tests and challenges. Your character's making choices. They're being forced to make choices, and they're owning up to the fact that it's time for them to become proactive now. They're pushing toward their goal. Note that their external goal may shift or change. So this is where your character's going to say, you know, all along I thought I wanted X, but now, based on this new information and the things I'm learning both about my situation and myself, it may be time for me to embrace a new goal. This is where they're facing confrontations. They're resisting death over and over. So this is where you're really ramping up the conflict, you're ramping up the character challenges, and you're starting to ramp up the story. That's what keeps readers turning pages. So you're going to set up tight scenes that lead right to the finale. The pacing is increasing. They're going to gather their last information, their skills, their allies, their clues, the revelations. You're flushing out the pieces of the puzzle that are going to drive the reader toward the end of the story. At this point, you should know the broad strokes of the climax by this point. If you haven't planned up to Act 3 so that you understand what the major 8 plot points are, this is where you need to figure that out. Because if you're not writing toward a major plot point, you're not writing toward whatever your climax is, you're kind of fumbling in the weeds. It sometimes is called the muddle in the middle because Act 2 and 3 can just get really muddy as you're trying to sort through what needs to happen in the story. So if you have those major signposts, those 8 major plot points already decided, you don't have to muddle around here because you have a roadmap to get you where you need to be. Now, I hear my pantsers saying, but that takes all the fun out of it. It takes the creativity out. I don't like to know where I'm headed. Totally valid. If that's your process, go for it 100%. But if you are a plotter and a planner, knowing those 8 major plot points, especially knowing the climax, where that character needs to get from Act 3 into 4, that's going to help you get there quicker and in a concise fashion, which is always satisfying to your reader. Now I've noted that this is where you experience the second battle. This is where they have some kind of an attack, some kind of bad thing happens, a conflict is pointed out, and you keep raising the stakes, okay? We talked about the death stakes in Act 1. This is where those stakes continue to rise. You continue to challenge that character and make them figure these things out. At this point, we're at about 62% into the book. If you go back over to my plotting tool, which I linked below, you can get it over at the Academy. The plotting tool lines out for you the percentages of about what part of the story you should be in when you get to each one of these major points. So just check your marks against the percentage that you've written versus the percentage where generally in a good novel things turn over or things happen. It doesn't have to be exact, but it's a good metric just to make sure that you're moving your story along. When we get down to the end, the 75% mark, sometimes this is what's called a set piece, right? You see the big castle, you see the big spaceship, you see the panoramic view. So set these things up, set up a nice third plot point view so that your reader knows we're really getting into the big stuff now. So this is where you're going to affectionately destroy your main character. The ashes that they rise from in Act 4 are going to happen here in your third plot point. What happens in the end of Act 3 is what sets them up for triumph in Act 4, which means in Act 3, they really have to get their butt kicked. They could be learning an awful truth that must be faced. They have no choice but to go forward. It could be a personal loss, right? This is where you lose your mentor and your character has to reassess what their reality is and how to go forward without the mentor. There's a major setback. Everything that we gained is lost, right? This is where you take everything away from them and make them regroup. You could have a shocking twist. You could thrust or break into Act 4. This means whatever's happening in this third plot point makes the final battle absolutely inevitable. They're going to have to deal with that bad guy, that antagonist, that threat. They have no other options. Sometimes this is where a writer will insert a black moment or a precursor to a black moment. It's the all is lost, dark night of the soul. I've lost everything. I've ruined everything. How am I ever going to come back from this? It just puts your character in the direst situation so that your readers are biting their nails and turning pages. So that brings us to the end of Act 3. Now I want to jump over here real quick and I just want to click on this little doozy that I'm working on for you. This is called a conflict generator, okay? And you can see the conflict matrix that I'm creating for you has over 100 different kinds of conflict down the left side. Everything from a dead body to being insulted or injured. You name it, we've got conflict. And then across the top, what I'm populating for you are the people with whom that conflict could occur. It could be personal, it could happen with a family member, a spouse, and so forth. So as soon as I finish putting the finishing touches on this little doozy, I will share this with you because it's going to help you when you're throwing all of the kitchen sink at your character here in Act 3 into Act 4. Well, I'm going to give you a whole fat, juicy bunch of conflicts that you can use to help populate out your story. So I hope this helped. I hope you've got something out of it. I hope you find something useful. I will continue developing the conflict matrix for you and I'll share it as soon as it's ready. But I will see you in the next video where we break down Act 4 and then we start going individually into the scene beats. So I will see you next time.